You missed a spot. He teased. The Mafia boss finally saw his maid trembling under his gaze. The tires of the rideshare crunched heavily over the wet gravel, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the night. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the lights of Port Rosalia into distinct smears of amber and gray. But up here, on the cliffside, there were no city lights to offer comfort. There was only the looming shadow of the Moretti estate, a sprawling fortress of stone and wrought iron that seemed to drink the darkness rather than repel it. Emily Carter tightened her grip on the strap of her worn backpack, her knuckles turning white. In her other hand, she clutched a manila folder containing her employment contract, the paper damp from the humidity. She looked at the digital clock on the dashboard, which read 11:45 at night. She was late, but the driver had refused to drive faster, claiming the roads up to the heights were treacherous. "I can do this," she told herself. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a stark contrast to the numbness spreading through her exhausted limbs. She had to do this. She thought of Ryan. Her younger brother was currently holed up in a cheap, peeling apartment on the south side of the city, counting on her. The debt he had accrued was not a simple bank loan or a credit card balance. It was street debt. It was $50,000 owed to people who did not send collection letters. They sent men with baseball bats and tire irons. This job, this live-in position at the Moretti mansion, offered a salary that was 3 times the market rate. It was the only lifeline they had left. "This is it," the driver said, his voice tight. He did not pull into the driveway. He stopped at the massive iron gates, idling the engine. "I ain't going past the gate. Miss, you have to walk from here." Emily nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. She stepped out into the misty drizzle, the taillights of the car fading quickly as the driver sped away, leaving her alone with the monsters behind the gate. She buzzed the intercom, announcing her name. With a heavy metallic groan, the gate swung open. The walk to the front door felt like a march to the gallows. The mansion was a beast of architecture, Gothic and imposing, with gargoyles perched on the eaves that seemed to watch her every step. When she reached the massive oak double doors, they opened before she could knock. Standing there was a woman who looked as if she were carved from the same gray stone as the house. Mrs. Danvers, the head housekeeper, wore a severe black dress and an expression that suggested smiling was a physical impossibility. She looked Emily up and down, her gaze lingering on the frayed hem of Emily's jeans and the scuffed toes of her sneakers. "You are late, Miss Carter." "Mrs." Danvers said. Her voice was dry, like shifting sand. "I am so sorry," Emily began, stepping into the foyer. "The driver—" "Excuses are not currency here." Mrs. Danvers cut her off, turning on her heel. "Follow me. Keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut." The interior of the mansion was breathtakingly cold. The floors were black marble, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead. The walls were lined with oil paintings of severe-looking men and landscapes that looked like they were painted during a storm. Everything screamed wealth, but it was a predatory kind of wealth. It was money that had been taken, not earned. Mrs. Danvers led her through a maze of corridors, her heels clicking with military precision. "Your duties are outlined in your contract, but let me make the unwritten rules clear. You are to be invisible, mister. Moretti does not like clutter, and he considers staff who linger to be clutter. You keep the house spotless. You cook when the chef is off duty, and you do not ask questions." "Ever—" They reached a narrow staircase leading up to the servants' quarters, but Mrs. Danvers stopped abruptly. She turned to Emily, her eyes narrowing. "And the most important rule," the housekeeper said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the empty hall. "You never, under any circumstances, go near the east wing after midnight. Whatever you hear, whatever you think you see, you stay in your room or you stay in the kitchen. Do you understand?" A shiver raced down Emily's spine. The warning was not given out of concern for her safety. She realized it was a threat. "I understand," Emily said softly. "Good. Your uniform is on your bed. You start at 5 in the morning. Do not make me come get you. Mrs. Danvers vanished down the hall, leaving Emily alone at the foot of the stairs. Emily climbed to her room, a small, slanted attic space that smelled of lemon polish and dust. She dropped her backpack on the narrow cot and sank down, burying her face in her hands. The silence of the house was heavy, pressing against her ears. She could feel the danger in the very air of the place, vibrating in the walls. But then she thought of Ryan's terrified face when he told her about the debt. She unpacked her few belongings, stripped off her damp clothes, and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning to come. The alarm on her phone buzzed at 4:45. Emily woke with a gasp, disoriented, before the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She dressed quickly in the uniform, a black dress with a white apron that felt archaic and stiff. It fit perfectly, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been loose. Her first morning was a blur of physical exertion and high anxiety. The house was enormous. She started in the grand foyer, polishing the black marble until her arms ached. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the rhythmic swish of her mop and the occasional creak of the house settling. Around 7 o'clock, the house woke up, but it was not the bustle of a normal family. It was the heavy, purposeful movement of men who carried violence with them like a second skin. Emily was dusting the intricate railing of the grand staircase when she heard the front door open. A group of men walked in. They were dressed in sharp, expensive suits, the fabric straining across broad shoulders. They spoke in low, gravelly voices, laughing at jokes she could not hear. As they moved, their suit jackets swung open slightly, revealing the leather holsters and the dull gleam of pistols strapped to their chests. Emily froze, clutching her feather duster like a shield. She turned her body toward the wall, pretending to be engrossed in cleaning a sconce. Her pulse raced in her neck, fluttering like a trapped bird. These were not security guards. These were soldiers. "Is the shipment secured?" one voice asked. "Yeah, Marco handled it," another replied. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. "I am furniture," she told herself. "I am just part of the house." Then, the air in the foyer seemed to drop 10 degrees. The chatter of the men died down instantly, replaced by a respectful, almost fearful silence. Emily felt the shift before she saw him. It was a magnetic pull, a center of gravity that demanded attention. She risked a glance over her shoulder, peering through the banisters. Walking through the center of the group was a man who looked like he owned the very air he breathed. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the light from the door. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been poured over his frame. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome, but hard as flint. Luca Moretti. She had seen his picture in the news, usually accompanying articles about alleged organized crime connections or high-stakes business mergers. But the photos did not do him justice. In person, he was terrifying. His eyes were dark, devoid of warmth, scanning the room with the precision of a predator looking for weakness. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, saying something to one of his men in Italian. His voice was a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, as if sensing her gaze. Luca looked up. His eyes locked onto hers. Time seemed to suspend itself. For one singular, terrifying second, Emily was pinned by his stare. It was not a casual glance. It was an inspection. He looked at her with a cold curiosity, taking in her face, her uniform, her frozen posture. There was no kindness in that look, only a sharp, calculating intelligence. Emily gasped softly and looked down immediately, turning back to the wall so fast she almost dropped her bottle of cleaning spray. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She scrubbed at a spot on the wall that was already clean, her heart thundering so loud she was sure he could hear it from the bottom of the stairs. She waited for footsteps. She waited for him to demand who she was or why she was staring. But the footsteps continued across the marble, fading down the hallway toward the west wing. When the heavy door clicked shut, Emily finally exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath until her lungs burned. by the afternoon. Emily was exhausted. Her knees were sore, her hands were dry from the chemicals, and her nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like Luca Moretti coming to find her. Mrs. Danvers found her in the hallway outside the library. The master is in a meeting, but his private office needs the floor treated. There is a stain near the bookshelf that the previous girl failed to remove. See to it, and be quick. He does not like to be disturbed, but the room is empty now. Emily nodded, taking her bucket and rags. Yes, Mrs. Danvers. Luca's office was a sanctuary of masculine power. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. The desk was a massive slab of mahogany, devoid of papers, with only a single laptop and a crystal tumbler sitting on it. The air smelled of expensive scotch, old paper, and a hint of sandalwood cologne. His cologne. Emily moved to the area Mrs. Danvers had indicated. There was indeed a dull scuff mark on the hardwood floor near the window. She dropped to her knees, dipping her cloth into the wood polish, and began to scrub. The rhythmic motion was soothing. Rub, circle, polish, rub, circle, polish. She allowed herself to zone out, focusing entirely on the grain of the wood. For a moment, she forgot about the debts, the guns, and the terrifying man who owned this house. She was just Emily, cleaning a floor, doing a job. She did not hear the door open. The plush Persian rug near the entrance muffled the footsteps. She did not realize she was not alone until a shadow fell over her, blocking the afternoon sun streaming through the window. Emily froze. She saw the reflection in the polished wood first, the dark trousers, the Italian leather shoes. She slowly lifted her head, her breath hitching in her throat. Luca Moretti was standing there. He had removed his suit jacket, and his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, watching her. He was not 5 feet away. He was right there. Emily scrambled to get up, her knee slipping on the wet polish. I am so sorry, sir, Mrs. Danvers said the room was empty. I didn't mean to intrude. Luca did not move. He did not speak immediately. He took a slow sip of his drink, his dark eyes tracking her panicked movements. He stepped closer, invading her personal space with an ease that suggested he recognized no boundaries but his own. Emily remained on her knees, paralyzed. To stand up now would bring her face to chest with him. She felt small, incredibly fragile, like a rabbit cornered by a wolf. He took another step. He was close enough now that she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the individual lashes framing those abyss-like eyes. The reflection of his face was clear in the floor she had just polished. Staring back at her like a dark mirage, Luca leaned forward, towering over her. The scent of him, sandalwood, whiskey, and warm skin enveloped her, making her head spin. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze dropping to the floor where her hand was still resting on the rag. "You missed a spot," he said. His voice was low, a rich rumble that seemed to caress the air. There was a teasing lilt to it, a mockery that was both terrifying and strangely intimate. Emily's hand jerked reflexively. The cloth slipped from her fingers. Her voice failed her. Luca watched her reaction with hawk-like intensity. He saw the way her fingers trembled against the wood. He saw the rapid rise and fall of her chest beneath the stiff uniform. He saw the flush of red creeping up her neck. "You are shaking." "Emily," he observed softly. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Hearing him say her name was a shock. She didn't think he knew she existed, let alone what she was called. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, looking down at her hands because looking at him was like looking into the sun. "I will fix it. I will leave." "I did not tell you to leave." The command was soft, but it carried the weight of steel. Luca crouched down. The movement was fluid, graceful for a man of his size. Suddenly, he was on her level. His face was inches from hers. The air between them crackled with a sudden, suffocating tension. He studied her in silence. He looked at the stray wisp of brown hair that had escaped her bun, the smudge of dust on her cheek, the way her eyelashes fluttered against her skin as she squeezed her eyes shut. "Look at me," he ordered. Emily forced her eyes open. She lifted her gaze, meeting his. Up close, his eyes were not just black, they were a deep, endless brown. Like coffee without cream, they were intelligent and searching. He was dissecting her, peeling back the layers of her fear to see what lay beneath. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked quietly. "I'm not." She lied, the corner of his mouth quirked up in a smirk that did not quite reach his eyes. "You are a terrible liar. You are trembling so hard I can hear your teeth rattling." He reached out. Emily flinched, expecting a blow. Luca paused, his hand hovering in the air. His expression shifted, the amusement fading into something unreadable. Slowly, deliberately, he reached forward and placed one finger under her chin. His skin was warm, rough with calluses that spoke of violence, yet his touch was surprisingly gentle. He lifted her face, forcing her to hold his gaze. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed down to this impossible moment. The office, the debt, the danger, it all vanished. There was only the heat of his finger on her skin and the dark pull of his eyes. Emily felt a strange jolt in her chest, a mixture of terror and a bizarre, unwanted thrill. Her heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy. She saw his pupils dilate slightly as he looked at her lips, then back up to her eyes. "You missed a spot," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper now. He wasn't talking about the floor anymore. He was talking about something else, something she couldn't understand yet. Then, the moment broke. Luca dropped his hand and stood up in one smooth motion, the distance between them suddenly a chasm again. He took a sip of his drink, his face masking over with that familiar cold indifference. "Finish up," he said, turning his back to her and walking toward his desk. "And stay out of trouble. Emily, this house eats little things like you." "Yes, sir," she breathed. She grabbed her bucket and cloth, her hands shaking so badly she spilled a little water. She wiped it up frantically, cast one last look at his broad back, and fled the room. That night, the rain returned, lashing against the slate roof of the mansion. Emily sat on her narrow bed in the attic, her knees pulled up to her chest, hugging her legs. The little room was cold, but her skin felt hot. She raised her hand, her fingers tracing the spot on her chin where he had touched her. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his finger. She could still smell the sandalwood and whiskey. She closed her eyes, and the image of him crouching in front of her played on a loop in her mind. The way his voice had dropped an octave. The way he had noticed her trembling when no one else had ever bothered to look at her twice. "You missed a spot." It was a tease, a power play. He was a predator, toying with a mouse. She knew that. She knew he was dangerous. She had seen the guns. She knew what his family did. But beneath the fear, there was something else. A confusing, burning knot of attraction that twisted in her stomach. It made no sense. He was everything she should run from. He was the reason people like her brother ended up in shallow graves. And yet, when he had looked at her, really looked at her, she hadn't felt invisible. For the first time in years, she had felt seen. Emily shook her head, angry with herself. "Stop it," she whispered to the empty room. "He's the boss. You are the maid. You are here for the money. That is all." She lay down and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin, listening to the wind howl outside. She vowed to stay invisible. She vowed to keep her head down, clean the floors, and collect her paycheck. She would save Ryan, and then she would leave this place and never look back. But as she drifted into a restless sleep, the darkness behind her eyelids was filled with the image of a man in a charcoal suit, smirking as he watched her fall apart. The weeks that followed Emily Carter's arrival at the Moretti estate blurred into a strange, high-stakes domestic rhythm. 2 weeks turned into 3, and the sheer terror of her first few days began to dull into a constant thrumming anxiety that lived in the back of her throat. She learned the house like a map of a battlefield. She learned that the floorboards on the second-story landing groaned under the weight of a footstep. giving her a 5-second warning before anyone appeared. She learned that the men who guarded the perimeter changed shifts at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening, the heavy clack of the gates echoing through the grounds like a clock chime. And she learned that Luca Moretti drank his coffee black, strong enough to strip paint, and that he expected it on the sideboard in the dining room at 7 sharp, steaming and untouched. Emily tried to make herself into a ghost. She moved through the opulent rooms with her eyes downcast, a phantom in a black uniform and white apron. She changed linens in bedrooms that smelled of expensive cologne and gun oil. She organized Luca's wardrobe, her fingers brushing against the silk of his ties and the crisp cotton of his dress shirts, trying not to think about the broad shoulders that filled them. She brought coffee to the library when Luca held court with his lieutenants. The room would be thick with cigar smoke and the low rumble of dangerous conversations. Men with scarred knuckles and cold eyes would pause as she entered, watching her place the tray on the table. She could feel their gazes sliding over her, assessing her like a piece of property. But she never looked up, yet, despite her best efforts to blend into the damask wallpaper. She could not escape the sensation of being watched. It was not the leering stares of the foot soldiers that made her skin prickle. It was him, Luca. She would be polishing the silver in the dining room, and she would feel a weight on the back of her neck. She would turn, and he would be standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, a glass of water in his hand, just watching. He never said a word. He would simply observe her with that dark, unreadable expression, his eyes tracking the movement of her hands. When their eyes met, he would not look away. He would hold her gaze until she was the one forced to break it, flushing hot with embarrassment and fear. It was a game, she realized. A predator studying a new, interesting creature that had wandered into his den, and she was terrified that one day he would decide he was done watching and ready to strike. One Tuesday morning, the house was unusually quiet. The rain had been falling over Port Rosalia for 3 days straight, a relentless gray sheet that turned the ocean view into a wall of fog. Most of the men were out on business, leaving the mansion echoing and empty. Mrs. Danvers had assigned Emily to deep clean the bookshelves in Luca's private study. It was a task that required a ladder and silence. Emily was grateful for the solitude. She hummed a quiet tune under her breath as she dusted the tops of the leather-bound volumes, the smell of old paper and lemon polish comforting her. The heavy oak door creaked open. Emily jumped, nearly dropping her feather duster. She spun around on the ladder, her heart leaping into her throat. Luca walked in. He was alone, dressed in a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking tired. He carried a stack of files under one arm. He stopped when he saw her, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "I'm sorry, sir," Emily stammered, already scrambling down the ladder. "I thought you were out. I will come back later." "Stay," he said. The single word rooted her to the spot. It was not shouted, but the command was absolute. Luca walked to his massive desk and dropped the files onto the mahogany surface. "You're not disturbing me. Finish your work. I have papers to review." "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice small. He glanced at her as he sat down, the leather chair creaking under his weight. "Do I look unsure? Emily?" "No, sir." "Then get back on the ladder." Emily climbed back up, her legs feeling like jelly. The room, which had felt spacious a moment ago, now felt suffocatingly small. The air seemed charged with static electricity. She could hear the scratch of his pen on paper, the rustle of pages turning, and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Every movement she made felt amplified. She dusted the books with trembling hands, acutely aware that his back was to her, but she still felt exposed. She reached for a heavy folder on the top shelf, intending to dust behind it. It was heavier than she expected. Her grip slipped. The folder tumbled from her hands, hitting the floor with a loud slap. It burst open, scattering glossy photographs across the Persian rug. "Oh no!" Emily gasped. She scrambled down the ladder, dropping to her knees to gather the mess. "I'm so sorry. I'm so clumsy. She froze. The photos were not of family vacations. They were surveillance shots, high quality, Zoomed-in images of Luca shaking hands with the city's mayor, Luca dining with a prominent judge, Luca standing on a dock with a senator. They were incriminating. They were proof of the spiderweb of influence he held over the city. A hand reached into her field of vision. Luca was on the ground beside her. He had moved so silently she hadn't heard him leave his chair. They were kneeling side by side, their shoulders brushing. The contact sent a shockwave through Emily's body, sharp and electric. It was as if she had touched a live wire. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the solid, dangerous warmth of his arm against hers. Her fingers brushed his as they both reached for the same photograph. Emily snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. She looked up, eyes wide, breath hitching in her chest. Luca did not pull away. He held the photograph, but he was looking at her. His face was inches away. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the fine lines of fatigue around them. The scent of sandalwood and rain overwhelmed her senses. He slowly gathered the photos, stacking them neatly, but he did not stand up. He stayed there, on the floor with her, closing the distance until she had to lean back to keep from touching him again. "You are from the north side, aren't you?" he asked. The question was deceptive in its mildness. His voice was low, conversational, but Emily heard the steel underneath. Yes, sir," she whispered. "How did you know?" "Your accent," he said. "It comes out when you are scared, which is always—" He placed the folder on the floor and turned his body fully toward her, resting his arm on his raised knee. "Do you have family, Emily?" Emily swallowed hard. "Just a brother. And parents?" "They died a few years ago. Car accident." Luca nodded slowly, his gaze drifting over her face, analyzing every micro-expression. "So you are the provider. That is a heavy burden." "I manage," she said, her voice tight. "Do you?" He tilted his head. "You arrived here with a backpack and a look in your eyes that I usually see on men who are about to be executed. You took a job that requires you to live in a house full of armed men, cut off from the world. Why?" Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't tell him about the debt. She couldn't tell him that his own organization, or at least the loan sharks who paid up to him, were the reason she was here. "I needed something stable," she lied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "The pay is good, and I like to clean." Luca stared at her, the silence stretched, heavy and thick. He knew she was lying. She could see it in the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened. He could smell the deception on her like cheap perfume. "Stable," he repeated, testing the word. "You think this house is stable?" "It has a roof and walls," she said, looking down at the rug. "That is enough for me." Luca let out a short, dry laugh. He reached out, his fingers hovering near her arm for a second before he pulled back, thinking better of it. Everyone in this city wants something from me, Emily," he said softly. "Money, power, protection, mercy. I wonder what it is you really want. I just want to do my job. Mr. Moretti." "Luca." She looked up, startled. "Sir? My name is Luca. When we are alone, you call me Luca." He stood up then, the sudden movement making the air swirl around them. He offered her a hand. Emily hesitated. She looked at his large, calloused hand, then up at his face. If she took it, she felt like she would be agreeing to something she didn't understand. But refusing him was not an option. She placed her small, trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, firm, encompassing. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. For a moment, she was standing too close to him again, her chest brushing his shirt. He held her hand for a second longer than necessary. "Go back to work, Emily, but be careful what you drop. Some things are better left on the shelf." That night, the storm that had been threatening the coast finally made landfall. The wind howled around the mansion like a banshee, rattling the heavy window panes in their frames. Thunder rolled constantly, a deep, guttural growl that shook the floorboards. It was just past 10 o'clock. Emily was in the main kitchen, a cavernous room of stainless steel and industrial appliances. The chef had gone home hours ago, and Mrs. Danvers had retired to her quarters. Emily was finishing the last of the washing up, the warm, soapy water soothing her fraying nerves. The lights flickered once, twice, then with a loud zap, the mansion plunged into total darkness. Emily gasped, freezing in place. The darkness was absolute. The storm outside blocked any moonlight, and the thick curtains shut out the rest. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass and the wind screaming through the chimneys. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Danvers?" Silence answered her. Panic began to rise in her chest. She hated the dark. She turned blindly, reaching for where she remembered the counter was. But her hand knocked into a drying rack. A crystal glass slid off the edge and shattered on the tile floor with a piercing crash. Emily jumped back, her heart pounding. "No, no, no," she whispered. Suddenly, a beam of white light cut through the blackness. It swept across the kitchen, illuminating the stainless steel islands, the hanging copper pots, and finally landing on Emily. She shielded her eyes, squinting into the glare. "It is just a blown transformer." The voice was deep, calm, and instantly recognizable. Luca. He lowered the flashlight so it wasn't blinding her. He was standing in the doorway, the light casting long, dancing shadows across his face, making his cheekbones look sharper, his eyes darker. He was in his shirt sleeves again, a gun holstered at his hip, clearly visible in the harsh light. I dropped a glass," Emily stammered, pointing at the floor. "I got scared when the lights went out." "Stay where you are," Luca commanded. "You are barefoot. You will cut yourself." He moved into the room, the flashlight beam swaying as he walked. He placed the heavy flashlight on the counter, angling it so it bathed the space in a dim, ambient glow. Then he pulled out his phone and turned on its light as well, setting it on the table. The kitchen was now filled with a strange, shifting twilight. It felt intimate, private. The rest of the huge house had ceased to exist. There was only this pool of light and the two of them. Luca walked toward her. He looked down at the shattered crystal near her feet, without a word. He crouched down and began to pick up the larger shards. "Sir, no," Emily protested, moving to kneel. "I can do that. Please, you shouldn't." "I told you to stay put," he rumbled, not looking up. "I do not need my maid bleeding all over the floors." He stood up, dumping the glass into the trash bin. He turned back to her, stepping closer to inspect the floor for smaller pieces. He was so close now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, combating the chill of the storm-swept house. He looked down at her feet, then slowly traveled up her legs, her waist, to her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she breathed. "I am fine." He reached out, his hand moving toward her face. Emily held her breath. He picked a tiny, glittering shard of glass from the shoulder of her uniform, his knuckles grazing the curve of her neck. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shiver racing through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Luca did not pull his hand away immediately. He let it hover there, near her neck. The tension in the room spiked, thick and heavy. The air felt thin, hard to breathe. He took a step closer. Emily had to tilt her head back to look at him. His eyes were dark pools in the dim light, watching her mouth. He looked hungry. Not for food, but for something else, something dangerous. "You are shaking again," he murmured. "I told you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm afraid of the dark." "Look at me," he said, his voice rough. "You are not afraid of the dark. Emily, you are afraid of me." She didn't deny it. She couldn't. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there. Emily's breath hitched, her body betrayed her. Instead of stepping back, she found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn in by the gravity of his presence. Crack boom! A massive peal of thunder shook the entire house, vibrating the floor beneath their feet. Emily shrieked, jumping violently. Reflexively, Luca moved, his arm shot out, wrapping around her waist to steady her. He pulled her hard against him, bracing her body with his own. The impact of hitting his chest knocked the air out of her. It was like hitting a wall of muscle. His grip on her waist was firm, possessive, his fingers digging into the soft curve of her hip through the thin fabric of her dress. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The thunder faded into a low rumble, but they remained locked together. Emily's hands were pressed flat against his chest. She could feel the rapid, heavy thud of his heart beneath the cotton shirt. It was beating just as fast as hers. She looked up, wide-eyed, and found his face right there. His pupils were blown wide. The mask of the cold Mafia boss was gone, replaced by raw, naked desire. He held her as if he had the right to, his body pressing into hers, molding her against him. She felt small, fragile, and overwhelmingly safe in his grip. The heat between them was suffocating. If he leaned down just an inch more, if she rose onto her toes. The realization of what was happening, of who he was and who she was, crashed into Emily like a bucket of ice water. She gasped, pulling back. She tried to step away, her cheeks burning so hot they hurt. Luca didn't let go immediately. His hand tightened on her waist for a fraction of a second, a silent protest, before he slowly released her. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He ran a hand through his dark hair, composing himself, the mask sliding back into place. "The generator will kick in within 5 minutes," he said. His voice was strained, lower than usual. He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes pinned her to the spot. "You are safe in this house. Emily," he said, the words sounding like a vow. "No one will touch you here. Not the storm. Not my men." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, the suspicion creeping back in to mix with the heat. "As long as you stay honest with me," the words landed like stones in her stomach. Honest. The guilt of her secret, of Ryan, of the debt, of the reason she was really here, twisted inside her. She couldn't get the words out. "Go to your room," Lucas said abruptly, turning away to pick up his flashlight. "Take the stairs. I will wait here until the lights come back." Emily didn't wait to be told twice. She turned and fled the kitchen, her bare feet slapping against the cold tiles, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. 2 hours later, the power had returned. Humming steadily through the mansion walls, Luca lay in his massive bed in the master suite. The room was dark, save for the glow of his smartphone. He was on a secure line with Marco, discussing a potential territory dispute near the docks, but he wasn't listening. "Boss, you there?" Marco's voice crackled in his ear. "Yeah," Luca grunted, staring at the ceiling. "I'm here." But he wasn't. He was back in the kitchen. He looked at his hand, the hand that had held her waist. He clenched his fingers into a fist. He could still feel her. She'd been so small against him, so soft. He remembered the way her breath had hitched when he touched her neck. He remembered the dampness of her eyelashes in the flashlight's glow, the way her lips had parted in surprise. She was terrified of him. He knew that. She trembled every time he walked into a room. And yet, when the thunder had crashed, she hadn't pushed him away. She had melted into him. "Boss, about the Verona shipment," Marco continued. "Handle it," Luca snapped, cutting him off. "Do what you think is best. Don't call me again tonight unless the house is on fire." He hung up and tossed the phone onto the nightstand. He rubbed his face with his hands, exhaling a long, frustrated breath. He was the head of the Moretti syndicate. He had a war brewing with the Verona crew. He had millions of dollars in shipments moving through the port. And all he could think about was the way his maid's heart had hammered against his chest, and the lie he had seen in her eyes when she told him she was just there for the job. "Who are you?" "Emily," he whispered to the darkness. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. Only the image of her, trembling under his gaze, waiting for him to make a move, and the terrifying realization that he wanted to. He wanted to make a move more than he wanted his next breath. The week that followed the storm was suffocating. The air in the Moretti mansion felt heavy, charged with a static tension that made the hair on Emily's arms stand up whenever she entered a room. The intimacy of that night in the kitchen, the way Luca had held her when the thunder cracked, hung between them like a ghost. He didn't speak of it, and neither did she. But the memory was there in every lingering glance, in the way he tracked her movements across the dining room, But the bubble of domestic tension burst on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily was passing the open door of the main study, a stack of freshly pressed linens in her arms, when she heard Luca's voice. It was not the low, teasing rumble she had heard in the office, nor the protective baritone from the kitchen. This was a voice of cold, jagged steel. "I do not care about excuses. Marco," Luca snapped. Emily froze, pressing herself against the wall just out of sight. She knew she should keep walking. Mrs. Danvers had been clear about eavesdropping, but the tone of his voice anchored her in place. "The Verona crew is pushing south," Luca continued, the sound of a heavy glass slamming onto a desk punctuating his words. "They think because we have been quiet, we are weak. If they cross the boundary line at the docks, I want them removed, permanently." There was a pause. Presumably Marco responding on the other end of the speakerphone. "No," Luca cut in, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "No loose ends. If anyone owes us, or if anyone is talking to them, you cut those ties. You make sure the message is received. We do not tolerate liabilities." Loose ends. The phrase turned Emily's blood to ice. She stared at the damask wallpaper, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Ryan, her brother, was the ultimate loose end. He owed money to the syndicate. He was a liability. If Luca decided to clean house to prepare for a war with this Verona crew, what would happen to a gambler who couldn't pay his debts? She didn't hear the rest of the conversation. She hurried down the hall, her legs trembling, the linens clutching tight to her chest as if they could shield her from the reality of her world. Emily had a 2-hour break scheduled for that afternoon. Usually, she spent it in her room or reading in the garden, but today, panic drove her out the gates. She told Mrs. Danvers she needed to run a personal errand at the pharmacy. The housekeeper had eyed her suspiciously, but had waved her off with a warning to be back by 4 o'clock sharp. Emily took a rideshare down from the Heights to the industrial district near the port. The air here was different, thick with the smell of diesel, salt water, and rotting fish. She met Ryan at a place called the Rusty Anchor, a grimy cafe with fogged windows and sticky tables that sat in the shadow of the shipping containers. Ryan was already there, huddled in a booth at the back. He looked terrible. His skin was gray and clammy. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his leg was bouncing nervously under the table. "Em," he breathed when he saw her, reaching out to grab her hand. His palms were sweaty. "I didn't think you would come." "I had to," Emily whispered. Sliding into the booth, she kept her head down, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. "Ryan, you have to listen to me. Things are getting bad up at the house. Moretti he is cleaning up. You need to lay low. Do you have the money for this month's interest?" Ryan shook his head frantically, his eyes darting around the room. "Forget the money. Em, that is not the problem anymore." "What do you mean?" Emily felt a cold pit open in her stomach. "If you don't pay, it is not just Moretti's guys," Ryan hissed, leaning over the table. 2 days ago, some guys approached me outside my apartment. They weren't syndicate. They said they were with the Verona crew. The name hit Emily like a physical blow, the same name Luca had mentioned. "Ryan," she choked out, "what did they want?" "They know you are working in the mansion," Ryan said, his voice trembling. "They know you are the maid. They told me that if I want my debt with them cleared and the debt with Moretti gone, I have to get you to help them." "Help them?" Emily pulled her hand back, horror washing over her. "Help them do what?" "They want a schedule," Ryan whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "They want to know when the guards change shifts. They want to know when Moretti is alone." "No," Emily said, shaking her head violently. "No, Ryan, that is treason. They will kill us. Luca will kill us." "They are going to kill me anyway," Ryan's voice rose, cracking with hysteria. "Em, please, they said they would break my legs if I didn't come back with something. Just a time. Just tell me when the side gate is unlocked." "I can't," she said, tears stinging her own eyes. "I can't betray him. Ryan, he trusts me." "He's a monster," Ryan snapped. "He's a mob boss. Emily, he doesn't care about you. You are just the help." Emily looked at her brother, this terrified, desperate boy she had spent her life protecting, and felt a wave of nausea. She loved him, but she couldn't do this. She couldn't sell Luca out to his enemies. "I won't do it," she said firmly. "We will find another way. I will ask for an advance. We will pay them off. It is too late for money." "It is never too late," she insisted, though she didn't believe it herself. She checked the clock on the wall. "I have to go back. If I am late, he will notice. Do not talk to the Verona men. Ryan, promise me." Ryan didn't answer. He just put his head in his hands. Emily stood up, her heart breaking. As she turned to leave, she glanced toward the front of the cafe. In the corner, a man in a beige trench coat was reading a newspaper. He hadn't turned a page in the 20 minutes she had been there. As she walked past, he lowered the paper slightly. His eyes were cold, hard, and fixed directly on her. A shiver raced down her spine. She pushed through the door into the cool, salty air and practically ran to the waiting car. The return trip was a blur of anxiety. Emily felt like the walls of the car were closing in on her. Every time the driver checked the rearview mirror, she flinched, expecting to see the man from the cafe following them. She made it back to the mansion at 3:55. She hurried through the servants' entrance, breathless and flushed, stripping off her coat and smoothing her uniform. She splashed cold water on her face in the staff bathroom, trying to wash away the guilt that felt like a layer of grime on her skin. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, jumping at shadows. Dinner was served at 8. Emily was tasked with pouring the wine. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to use both hands to steady the bottle. Luca sat at the head of the long table, eating alone. He was silent, his face a mask of brooding concentration. He didn't look at her once. That terrified her more than if he had shouted. After dinner, she was collecting the dishes when Mrs. Danvers appeared. "Leave that," the housekeeper said. "Mr. Moretti wants to see you in the library. Now." The plate in Emily's hand clattered onto the tray. "Me? Did I do something wrong?" Mrs. Danvers didn't smile. "He does not explain himself to me. Go." The walk to the library felt like a funeral procession. The house was dark, the shadows stretching long and distorted across the floor. Emily knocked on the heavy oak door, her knuckles barely making a sound. "Enter." She pushed the door open. The library was dim, lit only by the fire crackling in the hearth and a single lamp on the desk. Luca was standing by the window, looking out into the black night. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand. He didn't turn around when she entered. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Close the door." She did, the latch clicking shut with a sound of finality. Luca took a slow sip of his drink. "I trust you enjoyed your afternoon off." "Emily?" "Yes, sir. I went to the pharmacy." Luca turned then. His movement was slow, deliberate. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. "The pharmacy," he repeated. "Is that what they call the rusty anchor these days?" Emily's breath hitched in her throat. The room seemed to spin. "Do not lie to me," Luca said. His voice didn't rise, but it hardened into stone. "I told you on your first day. Emily, I told you that you are safe here as long as you are honest. Did I not?" "Yes," she whispered. "Then why?" he said, taking a step toward her. "Did my men photograph you sitting in a booth with a known gambling addict at a dockside dive bar, having a conversation that looked very much like a panic attack?" He knew. He knew everything. "He is my brother," Emily blurted out, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "Ryan, he is my brother." Luca stopped. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by calculation. "Your brother? The one you said you were supporting?" "Yes." "And why meet him in secret? Why lie about where you were going?" He placed his glass on the desk with a sharp clink. "Who was watching you? Emily?" Emily froze. He knew about the watcher, too. "I don't know," she cried, tears starting to stream down her face. "I swear I don't know who he was." "I think you do." Luca crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping right in front of her. He loomed over her, radiating power and suppressed fury. Was it the Verona crew? The name hung in the air between them. Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror. She couldn't lie anymore. The weight of it was crushing her. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, it was them." Luca swore softly in Italian, a harsh, guttural sound. He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair, pacing a tight circle on the rug. "How deep is he in?" 50,000 to the syndicate, Emily confessed, her words tumbling out in a rush. And I don't know how much to Verona, but they don't want money anymore. Luca, they want information. They told him they would kill him if he didn't get me to tell them when the guards changed shifts." Luca stopped pacing. He went unnaturally still. He turned back to her, his expression lethal. "And?" he demanded. "And what? And did you give it to them?" The accusation cut through Emily's fear like a knife. She stared at him, hurt blossoming in her chest alongside the terror. "No," she gasped. "No, I would never—" "Wouldn't you?" Luca stepped closer again, crowding her space. "To save your brother? People do desperate things for family. Emily, you lied to me about where you were. Why should I believe you didn't sell me out to save his skin?" "Because I am not like that," Emily shouted, the injustice of it giving her a sudden spark of courage. "I told him no. I told him I wouldn't betray you. I told him we would find another way." "There is no other way with Verona," Luca growled. "They are animals." "I know that." Emily was sobbing openly now, her shoulders shaking. "I know. I was terrified. I didn't want to endanger this house. I didn't want to endanger you. I was just trying to fix it." She covered her face with her hands, her body racking with sobs. "I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." The room fell silent, save for the crackling fire and Emily's ragged breathing. Luca watched her. He saw the genuine terror in her posture, the way she made herself small, the raw honesty in her breakdown. She wasn't a spy. She was a terrified girl trying to hold up the sky for someone else. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a sharp pang in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He hated that she had lied, but he hated even more that she had been scared enough to think she had to face this alone. "Emily," he said. His voice was no longer hard. It was low, rough with emotion. He stepped closer, invading her space, but this time there was no threat in the movement. "Look at me." She shook her head, keeping her hands over her face. Luca reached out. He took her wrists gently but firmly and pulled her hands away from her face. Her skin was flushed, her eyelashes spiked with tears, her lips trembling. "I didn't do it," she whispered brokenly. "I know," he murmured. "I believe you." He let go of her wrists, but he didn't step back. Instead, he raised his hand and brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away a hot tear. The gesture was shockingly tender. Emily stopped crying. She hiccuped, staring up at him, stunned by the sudden shift in his demeanor. His hand lingered on her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. His skin was warm, his touch grounding. "You should have told me," he said softly. "You should have trusted me." "I was afraid," she breathed. "I am just the maid. Why would you care?" Luca's eyes darkened. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the vulnerability, the fear, and the undeniable spark that had been between them since the moment he saw her shaking with that cleaning cloth. "You know you are not just the maid," he said. The air in the library changed. The fear evaporated, replaced by a sudden, intense heat that flared up between them like a match struck in a gas-filled room. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, but this time it wasn't from terror. She saw his gaze drop to her lips, then back to her eyes. He was waiting, giving her a chance to run. She didn't run. In a rush of emotion, relief, gratitude, and a desire she could no longer suppress, Emily took a half-step forward. Her body swayed toward his. Luca made a low sound in his throat. He cupped her face with both hands, tilting her head back. "Emily," he warned, a last attempt at restraint. "Please," she whispered. He leaned in. He moved slowly, giving her every second to pull away, but she stayed rooted to the spot, her breath catching in her throat. When his lips met hers, it wasn't tentative. It was a collision. Luca kissed her as if he had been starving for it. His mouth was hot and firm, moving against hers with a hunger that stole her breath away. Emily gasped, her hands instinctively clutching the front of his dress shirt, bunching the expensive fabric in her fists. He groaned into the kiss, the sound vibrating against her lips. One of his hands slid from her face to the back of her neck, tangling in her hair, while the other dropped to the small of her back. He pulled her against him, eliminating the space between them. Emily felt the hard planes of his chest against her softness. She felt the gun in his holster pressing into her hip, a reminder of the violence he carried. But in this moment, it didn't scare her. It anchored her. She opened to him, and the kiss deepened, becoming a desperate, searching thing. His tongue swept into her mouth, tasting her, claiming her. It was overpowering, intoxicating. He tasted of whiskey and danger. Emily's knees went weak. She pressed closer, rising on her tiptoes, molding her body to his. The heat pooled low in her stomach, spreading through her veins like liquid fire. She felt his hand slide down her spine. His fingers splayed wide, pressing her hips into his. For a moment, the Verona crew didn't exist. The debt didn't exist. There was only the firelight, the smell of wood smoke and sandalwood, and the overwhelming reality of Luca Moretti's mouth on hers. He angled her head, deepening the kiss even further, devouring her sigh. Emily felt consumed. She felt terrified and thrilled in equal measure. She'd never been kissed like this, with such absolute authority, such raw need. Luca broke the kiss, pulling back just an inch. His forehead rested against hers, his breathing ragged. His eyes were closed, his lashes dark against his cheekbones. "Dio," he muttered, his voice rough and breathless. He opened his eyes. They were black with desire, burning with an intensity that made Emily's toes curl. But there was conflict there, too. He looked at her swollen lips, the flush on her chest, and a shadow crossed his face. He pulled back slightly, his hands still gripping her waist, keeping her in his orbit but putting a fraction of distance between them. "This—" He cleared his throat, his voice regaining some of its command, though it remained husky. "This changes things." Emily blinked, coming back to earth slowly. She felt dizzy, her lips tingling. "Does it?" "Yes." Luca's expression hardened, but not with anger. It was determination. He released her waist and took a step back, straightening his cuffs, though his eyes never left hers. "From now on," he said, "you tell me everything, every phone call, every letter. If you sneeze, I want to know about it." "And Ryan?" she asked, her voice trembling again. "I will handle your brother." Luca stated, it wasn't a suggestion, it was a fact. "He will be moved tonight. My men will pick him up. The debt is no longer your concern. It belongs to me now." Emily's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "I protect what is mine," Luca said. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "What is mine?" He stepped forward again, stopping just short of touching her. He raised a hand, tracing the line of her jaw with one finger, a possessive gesture that sent a fresh wave of heat through her. "But you have to promise me—" "Emily," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You stay inside these gates. You do not leave this property unless I am with you. You stay where I can see you." It was a cage. She knew it was a cage, but looking into his dark, conflicted eyes, seeing the fierce protection warring with the loneliness she had sensed from the beginning, Emily didn't feel trapped. She felt chosen. "I promise," she whispered. Luca nodded once. He dropped his hand. "Go to your room. Lock the door. And Emily?" She paused at the door, looking back. "Do not let me catch you crying again," he said, his voice soft. "It ruins my focus." Emily slipped out into the hall, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, caught between the terrifying reality of the war to come and the memory of his lips on hers. The extraction of Ryan Carter was surgical. There were no sirens, no shouting matches in the street, and no violence that anyone could see. Two of Luca's men simply arrived at his dilapidated apartment complex in a black sedan, escorted him out with a firm grip on his elbows, and drove him to a secured safe house on the western edge of the city. When Luca told Emily it was done, she felt a wave of relief so potent it nearly buckled her knees. The Verona crew could not touch him now. The shadowed figures who had threatened to break his legs were locked out by the formidable machinery of the Moretti syndicate. But as the hours wore on, that relief began to curdle into a heavy, gnawing unease. Ryan was safe, yes, but he was no longer free. He was now a guest of the Moretti family, which meant he was leverage. Emily knew how this world worked. Even if she had only lived in it for a few weeks, nothing was free. Her brother's safety was a gift, but it was also a chain that bound her even tighter to the man with the cold eyes and the warm hands. She was no longer just working off a debt. She was working off a life. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. The invisible wall that had separated Emily from the inner workings of the house began to dissolve. Luca no longer treated her as a phantom haunting the hallways. He began to summon her. It started small. A request for fresh coffee during a mid-morning strategy meeting. Emily entered the library with a silver tray, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The room was thick with tension and cigar smoke. 6 men sat around the mahogany table, maps of Port Rosalia spread out between them like a risk board. Marco Sanzio was there, tracing a line along the docks with a heavy finger, arguing about shipping routes. When Emily walked in, the conversation died instantly. 6 pairs of eyes turned to her. In the past, those looks had been dismissive or leering. Now, they were different. The men looked at her with a wary respect, or perhaps just caution. They knew. They had seen the way the boss watched her. They knew she was the reason they had moved a low-level gambler into a high-security apartment. Emily kept her eyes down, setting the tray on the sidebar. She could feel the weight of their attention. Heavy and suffocating. "Leave it," Luca said. His voice cut through the silence, calm and commanding. She risked a glance at him. He was sitting at the head of the table, leaning back in his leather chair, an unlit cigar rolling between his fingers. He wasn't looking at the map. He was looking at her. His gaze was possessive, a silent claim that told every man in the room exactly where she stood in the hierarchy. "Is there anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "No," Luca said, his eyes softening just a fraction, a microscopic shift that only she would notice. "That is all. Thank you. Emily." She left the room, conscious of the silence that held until the heavy door clicked shut behind her. She leaned against the wood for a moment, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was safe, but she was also on display. She had been moved from the shadows to the spotlight, and the glare was blinding. The week progressed in a blur of heightened security and quiet intimacy. The threat from the Verona crew was still a dark cloud on the horizon, but inside the gates, there was a strange, suspended calm. Luca was busier than ever, orchestrating the defense of his territory, but he made time to find her. He would catch her in the hallway and ask about the book she was reading. He would stop by the kitchen late at night, ostensibly for a glass of water, but would stay for 20 minutes just to watch her dry dishes. The terrifying Mafia boss was becoming something else, a man who was lonely, and who had decided that she was the only person he wanted to share that loneliness with. One Friday evening, the air in the house was particularly charged. Luca had been gone since dawn, attending a high-stakes negotiation with the heads of the neutral families in the city. It was a peace summit meant to prevent the Verona aggression from spiraling into an all-out turf war. Emily spent the evening in the main living room, polishing the mahogany bar. It was busy work, really. The wood already gleamed, but she couldn't sit still in her room. She needed to be downstairs. She needed to know he was back. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11 times. Finally, the front door opened. The heavy thud of the lock sliding home echoed through the foyer. Emily froze, her rag hovering over the wood. Luca walked into the living room. He looked exhausted. His suit jacket was draped over one arm. His tie was loosened and hanging askew, and the top 2 buttons of his white dress shirt were undone, revealing the hollow of his throat. His hair was messy, as if he had run his hands through it a dozen times. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, he just stared, his dark eyes adjusting to the dim light of the room. Then, his shoulders dropped, the tension bleeding out of his frame. "You're still up," he said, his voice raspy with fatigue. "I was just finishing," Emily said, though she made no move to leave. "Did it go well?" Luca walked over to the bar, tossing his jacket onto a nearby armchair. He moved into her space, the scent of expensive tobacco and the city clinging to him. "It went," he said, reaching for a crystal decanter of amber liquid. "We bought peace for another month, maybe 2, in my world. That is a victory." He poured 2 glasses. He slid one across the polished wood toward her. Emily hesitated. "I'm on the clock, sir." "The clock stopped when I walked through the door," Luca said. He picked up his own glass and held it up, a wry smile touching his lips. "Drink with me, Emily. A toast." She reached out and took the glass. Her fingers brushed his, and the familiar spark of electricity jumped between them. "What are we toasting to?" "To surviving another day in this madhouse," he murmured. They drank. The whiskey burned pleasantly on the way down, settling as a warm weight in her stomach. Luca bypassed the formal armchairs and walked to the large leather sofa in the center of the room. He sat down heavily, resting his elbows on his knees, staring into his glass. He patted the cushion beside him. "Sit." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Emily walked around the bar and sat next to him. She sat closer than was proper for a maid and her employer, leaving only a few inches of distance between them. The leather creaked as she settled. "My father used to sit in this room," Luca said suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't look at her. He was staring at the fireplace, though it was cold. He would sit right here and list all the ways I had disappointed him that week. I was too soft. I thought too much. I hesitated before pulling the trigger. Emily turned to look at him. Surprised by the admission, he rarely spoke of his father, the legendary and brutal Giovanni Moretti. He wanted a weapon. Luca continued, swirling the liquid in his glass. He didn't want a son. He wanted something he could aim at his enemies, so he forged me. He beat the softness out of me until he thought there was nothing left but steel. He took a sip, his expression bitter. He never asked if I wanted the throne. He just assumed I would take it because it was the only thing he knew how to give. Emily watched the play of shadows on his face. She saw the weary boy beneath the dangerous man. "Do you want it?" she asked softly. "The throne?" Luca turned his head to look at her. "I want to keep my people alive. I want to keep this house standing. Beyond that, I don't know." He shifted, turning his body toward her. "What about you, Emily? What did you want before you were dragging your brother out of gambling dens?" "I wanted to be a nurse," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I was in school for a year. Then my parents died, and the life insurance wasn't enough to cover the mortgage and Ryan's tuition. So I dropped out." "And you worked," Luca said. "I worked," she nodded. "I waited tables at a diner on 4th Street. I cleaned offices at night. I worked at a laundromat on weekends. I did whatever I had to do to keep the lights on." "You carried the weight of a family on your back," Luca said quietly. "Just like me." "It is not the same," Emily said. "You run a city. Luca, I was just trying to pay the electric bill." "It is exactly the same," he countered. He set his glass down on the coffee table with a sharp clink. "We both sacrificed who we could have been for the people we felt responsible for. We are both survivors. Emily, we just survive in different jungles." The comparison hung in the air, bridging the gap between their worlds. He wasn't looking down at her. He was looking across at her, seeing an equal. Luca reached out. His hand, warm and rough, covered hers where it rested on her knee. He began to trace slow, deliberate circles on the sensitive skin of her inner wrist with his thumb. Emily's breath hitched. She watched his hand, mesmerized by the contrast of his dark, tanned skin against her pale wrist. She could feel her own pulse hammering against his thumb, betraying her reaction. "You are shaking again," he murmured, but this time there was no mockery in his tone, only wonder. "I can't help it," she whispered. "Does it scare you?" he asked, his gaze lifting to lock with hers. "Being this close to me?" "Yes," she admitted. Then, braver than she had ever been, she added, "But not because I think you will hurt me." Luca's eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide until the gold flecks were swallowed by the black. The air in the room seemed to vanish, leaving only a vacuum filled with his scent and his heat. He leaned in. He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to stand up, to remember her place. Emily didn't move. She couldn't. She was held fast by the gravity of him. He closed the distance. His lips brushed hers, a touch so light it was barely there, a question asked in the silence. Emily closed her eyes and leaned into him. He kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, frantic collision of the library. This was slow, deliberate, tender. It was a kiss that tasted of whiskey and exhaustion and a longing that had been buried deep for years. He kissed her with a reverence that shocked her, his lips moving against hers with a soft, coaxing pressure. Emily made a small sound in her throat and kissed him back. Her hesitation dissolved. She lifted her hand, her fingers trembling as she reached up to touch his face. Her palm found the line of his jaw, the roughness of his evening stubble scraping pleasantly against her skin. Luca groaned low in his chest, a vibration she felt in her own body. He shifted, angling his body to get closer. His knee brushed against her thigh, a solid, heavy weight that sent a jolt of heat straight to her core. The kiss deepened. It grew heavier, wetter. Luca's tongue swept against her bottom lip, and she opened for him instantly. He tasted her with a slow, thorough intensity, as if he were memorizing the flavor of her. Emily felt herself melting. The room, the polishing rag, the danger of the day, it all faded away. There was only Luca. His hand left her wrist and slid around her waist. He splayed his fingers wide, his palm burning through the thin fabric of her uniform. He pulled her toward him, anchoring her in place. She shifted, sliding along the leather until she was practically in his lap. Her body pressed against the hard wall of his chest. She could feel the rapid thud of his heart against her breasts. It was beating just as fast as hers. Luca pulled back slightly, just enough to breathe, his forehead resting against hers. "Emily," he whispered, his voice rough and wrecked. He didn't wait for an answer. He tilted his head and trailed his lips down the line of her jaw. He kissed the sensitive spot just below her ear, his hot breath washing over her skin. Emily gasped, her head falling back to give him access. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his dress shirt, tightening as a wave of pleasure crashed over her. He moved lower, his lips finding the curve of her neck. He kissed the pulse point there, then nipped lightly at the skin. "Luca," she breathed, the sound involuntary. She felt him shiver against her. The sound of her saying his name seemed to undo the last of his restraint. His arm tightened around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His other hand moved to the small of her back, his fingers pressing into her spine, tracing the curve of her body as if he were blind and she was the only map. The moment teetered on a precipice. The air was thick with unspoken hunger, heavy with the promise of more. Emily felt a dangerous heat pooling in her belly. She wanted him to keep going. She wanted to forget everything else. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was sharp. 3 distinct raps on the heavy wooden door frame of the living room entrance. It cut through the haze of desire like a gunshot. Emily jolted, her eyes flying open. Luca froze. His lips were still against her neck. She felt his entire body go rigid, the muscles coiling tight with sudden tension. "Boss?" It was Marco. His voice was urgent, devoid of apology. Luca let out a long, ragged breath against her skin. He stayed there for 1 second longer, as if trying to steal one last moment of peace. Before he pulled away, he sat back, putting a foot of distance between them. His eyes were burning, wild and dark, his chest heaving as he fought to regulate his breathing. He looked at her swollen lips, her flushed cheeks, the way she was looking at him with wide, dazed eyes, and a look of profound frustration crossed his face. "What is it, Marco?" Luca called out. His voice was steady, but it was an octave lower than usual. "Report from the perimeter," Marco said from the doorway. He didn't come in, respecting the shadow but needing the audience. We have a spotter vehicle 3 blocks east. Looks like Verona colors. We need you in the command room." Luca closed his eyes for a brief moment, masking the flash of anger. When he opened them, the lover was gone. The Mafia Don was back. He stood up. He adjusted his shirt, buttoning the collar. Though his hands weren't quite steady, he picked up his jacket from the armchair. He looked down at Emily, who was still sitting on the sofa, clutching her hands in her lap, trying to slow her racing heart. Luca reached out and took her hand one last time. He gave it a firm squeeze, a silent apology, a promise that this wasn't over. "Go to bed, Emily," he said softly. "Lock your door." He turned and strode toward the door, his face setting into a mask of cold violence as he stepped out to meet his lieutenant. "Show me," Luca said to Marco as they walked away, his voice fading down the hall. Emily remained on the leather sofa, surrounded by the silence of the empty room. She brought her fingers up to touch her neck where his lips had been just moments ago. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. She felt a crushing mix of disappointment that he was gone and a terrifying relief that they had been stopped, because she knew, with absolute certainty, that if Marco hadn't knocked, she would have let Luca Moretti do anything he wanted. The siege began not with a bang, but with a beige sedan. It was an innocuous car, a nondescript 4-door model that one might see in a grocery store parking lot or idling in a school pickup line, but in the rarefied air of the Heights, where every vehicle was either a luxury import or a security SUV, it stood out like a bloodstain on white silk. For 3 days, it parked just down the winding road from the Moretti gates. It never stayed for more than an hour, and the driver never stepped out. It was a message. The Verona crew was watching. They were counting the guards. They were timing the deliveries. They were waiting. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere shifted from tense to suffocating. Luca Moretti did not panic, but he did constrict. He tightened the perimeter of his world until it was a steel knot, and Emily was caught in the very center of it. "You do not leave the grounds," Luca told her on Wednesday morning. He was standing in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks, his face a mask of granite. "Not for the pharmacy, not for a walk, not to breathe fresh air. If you need something, you tell Mrs. Danvers, and she will have it brought in." "I understand," Emily said, clutching her feather duster. She felt a flash of irritation mixed with the fear. "Am I a prisoner, then?" Luca stopped. He looked up from his cuffs, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. "No," he said, his voice low and rough. "You are the only thing in this house that I cannot replace. So you will stay where I can keep you." He turned and walked out the door, surrounded by his phalanx of guards, leaving Emily standing on the cold marble floor. She felt caged. Yes, the walls of the mansion seemed to be closing in on her, the opulent rooms turning into gilt-edged cells. But beneath the frustration, there was a warmth that she could not extinguish. "The only thing I cannot replace." The words replayed in her mind like a favorite song, making her feel strangely, dangerously cherished, despite the encroaching threat from the outside world, or perhaps because of it. The connection between Emily and Luca deepened in the quiet spaces between the chaos. The mansion was filled with armed men, ringing phones, and the static crackle of radios. But Emily and Luca found ways to carve out pockets of silence that belonged only to them. It happened in the mornings, before the madness of the day truly began. Emily would be in the master dressing room, laying out his suit for the day. Luca would emerge from the shower, a towel wrapped low around his hips, water droplets still clinging to his broad chest. In the beginning, she would have fled the room, face burning. Now, she stayed. She would hand him his tie, her fingers brushing against his warm, damp skin. "This one," she would say softly. "The blue brings out the coldness in your eyes." "Is that a compliment?" he would ask, stepping closer, allowing her to loop the silk around his neck. "It is an observation," she would reply, her hands working the knot with practiced efficiency, though her heart hammered against her ribs. He would stand still, submitting to her ministrations, his gaze heavy on her face. He would watch her eyelashes lower as she focused on the knot. He would inhale deeply, breathing in the scent of her vanilla soap, grounding himself in her presence before he had to go out and be the monster the city expected. It happened in the dining room, across the expanse of the long mahogany table. He would be surrounded by lieutenants, discussing supply lines and territory markers. Emily would enter to refill the water glasses as she moved around the table, a ghost in her black uniform. Luca would stop speaking. He would track her movement, his eyes following the line of her back, the curve of her waist. When she reached his side to pour, he would look up. For a second, the rest of the room would vanish. He would give her a look so full of heat and possessiveness that she would nearly spill the water. It was a secret language, spoken in glances and silence, and it happened in the hallways, in the dead of night. One evening, Emily was carrying a stack of towels to the linen closet in the east wing. The hallway was dim, the sconces cast low to save power. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Luca. He'd been pacing, his mind clearly racing with strategy, but his reflexes were instantaneous. He caught her by the waist to steady her, the towels tumbling from her arms to the floor. "Careful," he murmured. Before she could apologize, he moved. He backed her up until her shoulders hit the wall, his hands planting on the plaster on either side of her head, boxing her in. He didn't touch her body, but his presence covered her like a blanket. "Luca," she breathed, looking up at him. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deep with strain. "Just a moment," he whispered. "Give me just a moment of quiet." He closed his eyes and rested his forehead against hers. They stood there in the dark hallway, his breathing syncing with hers. He didn't kiss her. He just drew strength from her proximity, as if she were a battery and he was running on empty. After a minute, he pulled back, kissed her forehead with a lingering tenderness, and walked away without a word, leaving her trembling and the towels forgotten on the floor. As the days turned into a week, Emily began to see the cracks in the armor of the Moretti boss. The invincible figure who commanded fear from the docks to the financial district was fraying at the edges. She found him one afternoon in his private study. He hadn't heard her enter. He was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't working. He was holding a small, silver-framed photograph in his hands, staring at it with an expression of profound sorrow. Emily stepped closer, her footsteps silent on the Persian rug. She saw the image in the frame, a beautiful woman with dark, laughing eyes, holding a young boy on her hip. The boy was unsmiling, solemn, looking at the camera with a wariness that was heartbreakingly familiar. "She was beautiful," Emily said softly. Luca didn't jump. He ran his thumb over the glass. "She was the only person who ever looked at me without wanting something," he said, his voice distant. "She hated this life. She hated what my father did. She used to cover my ears when the men came to the house with blood on their shirts." "She protected you," Emily said. "She tried," Luca corrected. He set the photo down gently. "But this house, it eats soft things. Emily, it ate her. And then my father made sure I became something that couldn't be eaten." He looked up at her then, and Emily saw the naked vulnerability in his eyes. It wasn't weakness. It was humanity. It was the terrified boy trapped inside the dangerous man, still looking for someone to cover his ears. In that moment, the last of Emily's defenses crumbled. The fear of his guns, the wariness of his reputation, the logical voice screaming that he was a criminal. It all fell silent. What remained was a fierce, aching ache in the center of her chest. She didn't just want him. She didn't just feel safe with him. She loved him. The realization was more terrifying than any threat from the Verona crew. Loving Luca Moretti was like loving a hurricane. It was dangerous, it was inevitable, and it would likely destroy her. The tension finally snapped on a Friday evening. Luca returned late from a meeting that had gone wrong. His knuckles were bruised, and there was a tight, angry set to his jaw. He stormed into the kitchen where Emily was making tea, tearing off his jacket and throwing it onto a chair. "Get me whiskey," he barked, not looking at her. "And ice. Lots of it." Emily didn't move. She looked at his hand, at the raw, red skin on his knuckles. "You are hurt." "I'm fine," he snapped. "Do as I asked." "No," Emily said. Luca turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "I'm not getting you whiskey," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I am getting you the first aid kit, and you are going to sit down and let me clean that? I do not have time for this. Emily, the Verona men hit one of our collection points. 2 of my men are in the hospital. You have to stop," Emily cried out. The silence that followed was deafening. "You have to stop pretending that this is normal," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "You come home bleeding. You have men guarding the gates with assault rifles. My brother is in hiding. How long can we live like this, Luca? How long until it is you in the hospital? Or worse?" "This is the life," Luca growled, stepping toward her. "I did not choose the board, Emily, but I have to play the game." "It is a game that kills people," she argued, stepping to meet him. "I see you, Luca. I see how tired you are. I see how much you hate it. You are not your father. You don't have to be him. If I am not him, then we die," Luca shouted, his temper flaring hot and sudden. "If I am soft, if I lay down my gun, they will storm these gates and burn this house to the ground with us inside it. Do you think I want this? Do you think I want to come home with blood on my hands to the woman I—" He stopped. The words hung in the air, unfinished but understood. He looked at her, his chest heaving. "I do what I do to keep the wolves away from the door. Emily, I do it for you. I do it for... So do not stand there and tell me to stop. I cannot stop, not while you are breathing." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emily standing alone, the silence ringing in her ears. Hours later, the house was quiet. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a heavy, humid stillness. Emily was in her room in the attic. She was sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, still dressed in her uniform, staring at the wall. She couldn't sleep. Her mind was replaying the argument, the raw pain in his voice, the look in his eyes when he almost said it. A soft knock came at her door. It was barely a sound, hesitant and light. "Emily!" Her heart leaped into her throat. She stood up and crossed the small room, unlocking the door and pulling it open. Luca was standing there. He had showered and changed into dark lounge pants and a simple gray t-shirt. The bruises on his knuckles were stark against his skin. He looked stripped down, defenseless. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Emily stepped back, opening the door wider. Luca stepped into the small, slanted room. It was humble, filled with the scent of her lavender laundry detergent and old books. He looked out of place here, too large and too powerful for such a confined space. Yet he seemed to breathe easier the moment the door clicked shut behind him. "I am sorry," he said, looking at the floor. "I should not have shouted. I pushed you," Emily said softly. "I shouldn't have—" "You were right," Luca admitted. He looked up, his expression raw and open. "I hate it. I hate that you have to see it. I hate that I bring this darkness to your doorstep." He took a step toward her. "I tried to stay away tonight. I sat in my room for 2 hours telling myself to leave you alone, to let you sleep, to keep my distance like a good employer." "Why didn't you?" Emily whispered. "Because I can't," he said simply. "I can't bear the thought of you being up here, thinking I am a monster. I can't bear the thought of letting you go." The confession shattered the last of the distance between them. Emily made a small, choked sound and stepped forward. Luca met her halfway. It wasn't like the kitchen or the library. There was no hesitation, no testing of boundaries. He reached for her, and she collapsed against him, his arms wrapped around her, holding her so tight it almost hurt. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling sharply, his body shuddering against hers. Emily wrapped her arms around his waist, sliding her hands up the broad expanse of his back, feeling the solid, steady thump of his heart against her chest. "Luca," she whispered into his shoulder. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were dark pools of emotion, regret, longing, and a fierce, burning adoration. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a slow, reverent kiss. He kissed her as if she were made of glass, as if he were afraid she might shatter in his hands. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her knees weak. He tasted of mint and sorrow. Emily sighed into his mouth, her hands moving up to cup his face, her thumbs brushing his cheekbones. She relaxed into him, melting against his strength. She felt cherished. She felt seen. But then, the tempo shifted. The tenderness ignited into something hotter, something urgent. Luca groaned, a low sound in the back of his throat, and his grip on her tightened. His hands splayed across her back, sliding down to her waist, pulling her hips flush against his. The kiss grew hungry. His mouth opened over hers, demanding and giving in equal measure. Emily felt the solid weight of his presence, the heat radiating from his skin, the undeniable evidence of his desire pressing against her stomach. She responded with equal fervor. Her fingers curled into his damp hair, pulling him down closer. She pressed her body into his, from chest to knees, wanting to eliminate every millimeter of space between them. She wanted to crawl inside his skin. She wanted to be so close that the world outside, the guns, the debts, the Verona crew ceased to exist. Luca walked her backward until her legs hit the edge of the mattress. She sat down heavily, and he followed, stepping between her knees. He towered over her, his hands framing her face, his thumbs stroking her jaw. He leaned down, kissing her neck, her throat, the sensitive spot behind her ear. "Emily," he murmured against her skin. "Enchanting. You are everything." She pulled at his t-shirt, wanting to feel his skin. "Luca, please." The plea hung in the air, heavy with invitation. Luca froze. His hands, which had been moving to the hem of her dress, stopped. He rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He squeezed his eyes shut, a look of exquisite pain crossing his face. "No," he whispered. Emily blinked, her heart pounding, confusion clouding her desire. "Luca?" He pulled back, straightening up. He took her hands in his, lacing their fingers together, but he kept a sliver of distance between them. "Not like this," he said, his voice husky. "Not here. Not while there are wolves at the gate." "I don't care about them," Emily said, breathless. "I do," Luca said firmly. He looked down at her, his eyes blazing with a promise that shook her to her core. "When I have you, Emily, when I truly have you, it will not be a stolen moment in an attic while we wait for an attack. It will be when you are safe. It will be when I can lay you down and take hours to worship you without listening for the alarm." He brought her knuckles to his lips, kissing them one by one. "I want you," he vowed, "more than I have ever wanted anything. But I will not take you until I can promise you that the morning after will be peaceful." It was a rejection, but it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. It was a restraint born of profound respect. He kissed her forehead one last time, lingering there. "Sleep, Emily. I will be right outside." He turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Emily fell back onto the bed, her body humming, her lips swollen, her heart full to bursting. She stared at the ceiling, feeling a mix of frustration and an overwhelming, terrifying hope. He loved her. He was waiting for her. Downstairs, in the bowels of the mansion, the peace was a lie. While Luca had been upstairs, distracted by his heart, the machinery of his enemy had been turning. 3 miles away, on a dark stretch of the coastal highway, a Moretti delivery truck sat idling on the shoulder. The driver was gone. The back doors were open, and the crates of high-value electronics that were supposed to fund the next month of operations were empty. But the theft wasn't the real blow. The real blow was inside the house. In the servants' quarters, a young man named Paolo sat on his bunk. He had been hired 2 weeks ago as an assistant groundskeeper. He was quiet, efficient, and kept his head down. He had passed the background check because his records were clean, a ghost created by the Verona crew specifically for this task. Paolo looked at his phone. A message blinked on the screen. "The shipment is secured. The boss is distracted. Do it tonight." Paolo deleted the message. He stood up and smoothed his uniform. He knew the schedule. He knew that the external sensors had a 10-second reboot cycle at 3 in the morning. He knew that the side door to the kitchen had a faulty latch that didn't always engage the magnetic lock. He slipped a small, serrated knife into his boot and walked out into the silent hallway. The mansion was sleeping, dreaming of safety, unaware that the door was already open. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the Moretti mansion, casting long, deceptive beams of light across the polished floors. It was a Tuesday, a day that felt dangerously normal. The alarms were silent. The perimeter patrols were on schedule, inside the house. The rhythm of life had returned to a steady, quiet hum that masked the rot spreading from within. Emily Carter was in the guest wing, a section of the house rarely used, arms full of fresh Egyptian cotton sheets. She moved with a practiced efficiency now, her body on autopilot, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the way Luca had looked at her the night before, the raw, restrained hunger in his eyes when he left her room. She was thinking about the promise he had made. When you are safe. She did not know that safety was currently dissolving beneath her feet. Down in the service corridor, near the kitchen, a young groundskeeper named Paolo paused by the side entrance. He checked his watch. It was exactly 10 o'clock. The external camera sweeping the east wall was on a 30-second reboot cycle. A flaw in the system he had sold to the Verona crew for a briefcase of cash. Paolo slid the deadbolt back. He opened the heavy door just an inch, leaving it unlatched. Then he walked away, disappearing into the gardens, his betrayal silent and absolute. Moments later, the door was pushed open. 4 men slipped inside. They wore black tactical gear and balaclavas. They moved like smoke, silent and fluid. 2 of Luca's guards were stationed at the end of the hallway, drinking coffee. Before they could reach for their radios, the intruders were on them. A flurry of movement, the dull thud of heavy blows to the temple, and the guards crumpled to the floor, unconscious before they hit the tile. The Verona men stepped over the bodies. They didn't kill them. That would trigger a noise. They had a map, detailed and precise, leading them straight to the guest wing where the traitor had indicated the maid would be at this hour. Their orders were clear. Take the girl, leave the house, and wait for Luca Moretti to beg. Emily hummed softly as she stripped the bed in the blue room. She tossed the old linens into a hamper and shook out a fresh sheet, watching it settle over the mattress like a cloud. She turned to grab a pillowcase and stopped. There, on the pristine cream carpet of the hallway just outside the open door, was a smudge. It was dark brown, mud. Emily frowned. Mrs. Danvers would have a stroke if she saw mud on the guest wing carpet. It was impossible. The staff never wore their outdoor shoes inside, and the gardeners were strictly forbidden from this wing. Curiosity warring with a sudden, prickling unease. Emily walked to the doorway. She knelt down to inspect it. It was fresh, wet earth, still glistening, and then she noticed the second print. It was the tread of a heavy combat boot. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 20 degrees. The silence, which had been peaceful a moment ago, now felt heavy, pregnant with threat. Emily stood up, her breath hitching. She turned to run, to find a phone, to scream. She never made it. A hand, gloved in rough leather, clamped over her mouth from behind. An arm, like a steel bar, slammed across her chest, pinning her arms to her sides. Emily tried to scream, but the sound was smothered against the leather palm. She was lifted off her feet, dragged backward into the room she had just been cleaning. Quiet. A harsh voice hissed in her ear. You make a sound, and I break your neck. Panic, hot and white, exploded in Emily's brain. Verona. They were here. She kicked out wildly, her sneakers connecting with the shins of her attacker. He grunted but didn't let go. She twisted her body, fighting with a feral desperation. She was not going to be a pawn. She was not going to be the reason Luca lost everything. She threw her head back, smashing her skull into the man's nose. There was a sickening crunch. The man swore violently, his grip loosening just a fraction as reflex took over. Emily tore the hand away from her mouth. Luca! The scream tore from her throat, shrill and terrified, echoing down the empty corridor before the hand slammed back over her lips. In his office on the floor below, Luca Moretti froze. He was in the middle of reviewing a contract, his pen hovering over the paper. The sound was faint, muffled by layers of wood and stone, but he heard it. He knew that voice. He knew that terror. The pen snapped in his hand, ink staining his fingers black. He didn't call security. He didn't check the monitors. He moved. Luca was out of his chair and across the room in a single fluid motion. He drew the semi-automatic pistol from his shoulder holster, racking the slide as he kicked the office door open. The mask of the businessman was gone. The face that emerged into the hallway was that of a warlord. "Marco!" he roared, his voice shaking the crystal in the chandeliers. "Upstairs! Now!" He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Not her, his mind chanted, a litany of fear and rage. Please God, not her. Upstairs, the chaos had spilled into the hallway. Emily had managed to elbow her captor in the ribs, knocking his mask askew to reveal a bloody nose and grit teeth. He stumbled, but another man was there instantly, grabbing her hair and yanking her back. "Forget the stealth," the second man barked. "Grab her and go." "The back stairs!" They dragged her toward the servants' staircase at the end of the hall. Emily fought them every inch of the way. She clawed at their hands. She dug her heels into the carpet. She made herself dead weight. Tears streamed down her face, blinding her, but she refused to stop fighting. "Move!" the man shouted, shoving her forward. They reached the landing just as Luca burst into the corridor from the main staircase at the opposite end. Time seemed to slow down. Luca saw them instantly. 4 men, black tactical gear, and in the center, Emily. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, her hair was a wild halo around her face, and her eyes were wide with terror. "Luca," she sobbed, seeing him. The lead Verona man spun around, raising his weapon. Luca didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space. The lead man took the bullet in the shoulder, spinning backward and dropping his gun. "Drop it!" Luca roared, advancing down the hall with his weapon raised, his eyes burning with a cold, hellish light. "Let her go, or I will gut you right here." The remaining 3 men scrambled. 2 of them grabbed Emily, using her as a human shield, dragging her backward toward the stairwell door. One of them pressed the cold barrel of a pistol against her temple. "Back off, Moretti!" the man screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Back off or I paint the wall with her!" Luca stopped dead. He stood 10 feet away, his gun trained on the man's head, his chest heaving. The sight of the gun pressed against Emily's skin made his blood run cold. He felt a fear he had never known, a paralyzing, nauseating terror that had nothing to do with his own life. "If you hurt her," Luca said, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating growl that was more terrifying than any shout. "There is no hole on this earth deep enough to hide you. I will find you, and I will take days to kill you." The Verona man hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "Throw down the gun, now!" Behind Luca, Marco and 3 other guards appeared on the landing. Weapons drawn, the hallway was a powder keg. Emily looked at Luca. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the way his hand trembled slightly on the grip of his gun. He was going to surrender. He was going to lay down his weapon to save her. And then they would kill him. No, she thought, not for me. She felt the man's grip on her arm shift as he tried to adjust his hold on the gun. His hand was slick with sweat. It was now or never. Emily stomped down with all her strength on the man's instep. At the same time, she threw her body weight backward, driving her elbow into his stomach. The man wheezed, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. "Get down!" Luca screamed. Emily threw herself to the floor. The hallway erupted. Luca dove forward, not firing, but launching himself through the air to cover her. He landed over her, his heavy body shielding hers completely, curling around her like a protective shell. Above them, shots rang out. Pop, pop, pop. The sound of bullets hitting plaster, the shatter of a vase, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face in Luca's chest. She felt him jerk sharply once, a grunt of pain escaping his lips, but he didn't move. He held her tighter, his hand cradling the back of her head, pressing her face into his shirt. "Stay down," he whispered roughly into her ear. I have you. Then silence. "Clear." Marco's voice rang out, breathless but steady. "Room clear. 2 down, 2 secured. Perimeter is locking down." Luca didn't move immediately. He stayed over her, listening, making sure the threat was truly gone. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. "Emily?" She opened her eyes. He was looking down at her, his face pale, his eyes frantic as he scanned her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her arms, her face. "Did they touch you?" "I am fine," she sobbed, clutching his lapels. "I am fine. Luca, you are bleeding." She looked at his left arm. The sleeve of his white shirt was torn, and dark red blood was blooming rapidly across the fabric. "It is a graze," he said, dismissing it without even looking. "It is nothing." He hauled her up, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging to him, her tears soaking his shirt. "I thought I lost you," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I thought I lost you." Around them, the house began to swarm with activity. Guards were shouting orders, dragging the Verona men away. Misses. Danvers appeared, looking shaken. But in the center of the hallway, amidst the shattered glass and the blood, Luca Moretti held his maid, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care who saw him shaking. The aftermath was swift and brutal, but it happened behind closed doors. The traitor, Paolo, was found within the hour. What happened to him was never spoken of, but the silence from the basement was heavy enough. Luca did not go to the hospital. He sat in the living room while the family doctor stitched his arm, refusing anything for the pain. He needed the pain. It kept him focused. Emily sat beside him, holding his good hand. She wouldn't leave his side, and he wouldn't let her go. When the stitches were done and the doctor had left, Luca stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the heavy iron gates that had failed to keep the world out. Marco stood by the door, waiting for orders. "We strike back tonight, boss?" Marco asked quietly. "We burn Verona to the ground for this." Luca was silent for a long time. He looked at the reflection of Emily in the glass. She looked small, exhausted, and brave. She had fought for him. She had almost died because of his name. "No," Luca said. Marco blinked. "Boss." Luca turned around. He looked at his lieutenant, a man who had been with him through wars and peace. "I am done," Luca said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a stone dropping into the ocean. "Done?" Marco asked, confused. "I am done with the blood," Luca said. "I am done with the fear. I am done letting this life threaten the only person who makes this house feel alive." He walked over to the desk and picked up a heavy file. The keys to the kingdom, the shipping routes, the contacts, the black ledger. He held it out to Marco. "The legitimate businesses stay with me," Luca said. "The construction firms, the real estate, the imports. We go clean, completely clean. The rest, the loans, the protection rackets, the street wars. It is yours if you want it, Marco, or you burn it. I do not care, but it does not come through these doors anymore." Marco stared at the file, then at Luca. He saw the resolve in his boss's eyes. He nodded slowly, taking the folder. "Understood, Luca," Marco said. He looked at Emily, gave a respectful nod, and walked out of the room, taking the underworld with him. Later that night, the mansion was strangely peaceful. The extra guards were gone. The frantic energy had dissipated, leaving behind a stillness that felt fragile but real. Luca found Emily on the balcony of the master bedroom. She was wrapped in a cashmere shawl, looking out over the glittering lights of Port Rosalia. The city looked beautiful from up here, a sea of diamonds against the velvet dark. He stepped up beside her. His arm was in a sling, but he moved with a new lightness. "It is a nice view," he said softly. "It is." Emily agreed. She didn't look at him. "Is it true?" "What misses?" "Danvers said that you gave it up?" "I gave up the parts that would get you killed," Luca said. He turned to lean against the railing, watching her profile. "Emily, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She turned to face him. "Always." "I have money," he said. More than we could ever spend. I have accounts in Switzerland, in the Caymans. I can set you up anywhere in the world. Paris, Tokyo, a villa in Tuscany. You could have a life where no one knows my name. You could be safe, truly safe." Emily frowned, a hurt expression crossing her face. "Are you firing me, Luca?" "I'm offering you a choice," he said, his voice straining. "I am a man with a lot of enemies. Emily, even if I go straight, the past has a long shadow. Being with me, it will never be simple. It will never be perfectly safe. You could leave tonight and never look over your shoulder again." He waited, his heart in his throat. He was giving her the door. He was terrified she would take it, but he loved her enough to open it. Emily studied his face. She saw the scar on his eyebrow, the bandage on his arm, the lines of worry etched into his forehead. She saw the man who had covered her body with his own while bullets flew. She saw the man who had looked at her shaking hands and called them beautiful. She took a step closer. She let the shawl slip from her shoulders. "I don't want Paris," she whispered. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck, careful of his injury. She pressed her body against his. "I don't want a villa," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "I want the madhouse, as long as you are in it." Luca let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Are you sure?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers. "There is no going back." "I don't want to go back," Emily said. "I love you, Luca." It was the first time she had said it. The words hung in the cool night air, stronger than any weapon, brighter than the city lights. Luca didn't speak. He couldn't. He captured her lips in a kiss that was slow, deep, and full of everything they had survived. It was a kiss of surrender. It was a kiss of promise. He kissed her, not as a boss kisses a maid, but as a man kisses the woman who saved his soul. They stood there for a long time, holding each other above the city, two survivors who had found a home in each other's arms. The final image was one of quiet victory. Inside the living room, the fire was dying down in the hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the furniture. The leather sofa, once a place of tension and interrupted moments, was now a haven. Luca and Emily lay curled together. His suit jacket was draped over her shoulders like a blanket. Her bare feet were tucked under his thigh. His good arm was wrapped around her, his hand resting possessively on her hip, while her head rested on his chest, listening to the steady, calm rhythm of his heart. They weren't speaking of the past. They weren't planning the future. They were simply existing in the present, sharing soft laughter and quiet whispers in the safety of the world they had chosen. The Mafia boss and the maid, the wolf and the dove, they had fought the darkness and won, and now they began the uncertain, beautiful journey of building a life defined not by power and fear, but by the fragile, fierce love they had bled to protect. "Thank you so much for listening to You Missed a Spot," he teased. "I hope you enjoyed the journey of Luca and Emily as much as I enjoyed telling it. It has been a roller coaster of emotions, from the fear in the library to the standoff in the hallway, and finally, to peace on the balcony. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from a rainy London, a sunny California, or somewhere else entirely? Please leave a comment down below and let me know. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an upload. We have so many more passionate, thrilling tales waiting for you. And don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Did Luca make the right choice? Until next time, stay safe and keep reading.